Jeffrey, how are you?
I am doing pretty good today. The sun's out, so I'm happy.
I know finally the sun is out and hopefully it will be out for a long time
I
and
hope
that
so.
tomorrow won't be a rainy day. But I'm very happy to meet you. It's my first time meeting you, Jeffrey, and it's very nice to have this chat with you that we're going to be having today because you actually practice in a very niche and interesting area that is going to be very useful for a lot of criminal lawyers. Many of us don't do the work that you do, but we're going to probably need you for our clients. So I'll let you talk about it. But before that, just to introduce, give an idea about what is it that you do. So you do a personal injury work. You're a civil lawyer and you do personal injury work, but you have developed a niche where you represent inmates or individuals who are in custody and who suffer injuries while in custody and how to help them get compensation uh, for these injuries that they've suffered. I mean, you're going to explain more in your own words. What is it exactly that you do? So I'll let you introduce yourself, Jeffrey.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you for the first time, and it's a
Mhm.
pleasure to be here. So thank you. Yes, my name is Jeffrey Hartman. I'm a partner at Lockyer ZaduK Zeeh in Toronto. And as you said, what I do is I tell people I'm a human rights slash personal injury lawyer for Canadian prisoners. So when something goes wrong, I see if I'm able to get compensation for the prisoner involved in the situation.
So before we get into what you do, I'm interested in knowing how is it that you got into this area because this is very unique, and I personally don't know anyone who practices in this very niche area. So tell us, how did you like, is this something that you knew this is what you wanted to do, or did you get into it as a result of prior work that you
No,
did?
I didn't know, and I think that many people, obviously can't speak for everyone, but my impression is that many people have some sort of personal connection to prisons, and I don't. Um, what How I got into it when I was a student in undergrad, which I started in 2004, which now is somehow over 20 years ago. But I was very interested in relationships of power and the relationship between the state and the citizen. After that, I did my master's and went to law school. I went to UVic for law school, which was a great place to go to law school. And in first year, I was very fortunate to get a job at a law firm there. Because it's a smaller town, the outside of government, the main areas you're dealing with are criminal, family law, and personal injury. I wasn't in government. I was at a private firm, so I started doing family and personal injury. From there, I got called there, and I practiced in Victoria for about a year, and then in Vancouver for about another year or two. But I didn't like the weather in Vancouver, so I
Yeah.
moved to Toronto. Uh, I practiced at a firm in Toronto and then opened my own firm doing family and personal injury. And um, I was very unsatisfied. I felt like the work I was doing was not important to me, which is a different thing from saying it's not important work.
Right.
It is
Yeah.
important work. It just
Yeah.
wasn't important to me. It felt like work.
Hmm.
It felt like a job. It felt like a chore. It wasn't important to me. And I felt like uh, whatever talent and gifts I have, which remain to be seen, but whatever those talents are, they weren't being put to the best use in that particular field.
Hmm.
So I had the really good fortune of meeting a judge through now my wife. The judge was a family friend of my wife's family, and I was, bemoaning my career to her. And I said, I can't stand doing this another day, except for these two cases. I have two cases at Maplehurst. They're just
Hmm.
regular personal injury cases that happen to take place at Maplehurst. I find them really interesting.
Yeah.
And so she's a criminal court judge. She sees every day what's going on in, places like Maplehurst, in the Ontario jail. And your viewers probably know what's going on in these
Oh,
places.
it's one of the most extreme places,
Yeah,
Maplehurst
nothing good.
happens to be.
Yeah,
Yes.
nothing good. but I had no idea because I'm coming at this from personal injury and
And
family.
family
Like
law.
I have no
Yes.
idea what's going on in these
Right.
places. But she told me uh, no one's really doing this kind of personal injury work. If you can figure out how to get clients, I think that you have a career there. I know, so I'm speaking as a judge, I know that judges are sick of what's going on in these places and no one's really
Hmm.
doing anything about it. So at that point, I was much younger. I was in my early 30s, and I was like, well, I'm on the verge of quitting being a lawyer anyway. I might as well
Oh
throw
no.
caution into the wind, and if this works out, great. If it doesn't work out, well, I'm done with this anyway, so who cares? I was young enough that the financial risk was something I couldn't afford it. I certainly couldn't afford it, but it was less daunting to take a huge financial risk like
Yeah.
that then than it would be now. So I just did it. And I fell in love with it. It reconnected me to what I initially felt was intellectually interesting as a student, which is relationships of power. So like I don't know I'm not better or worse than anyone. I'm not trying to say that, but I don't have a connection to a loved one who's ever been in jail. I don't know anyone in my personal life who's ever been in jail. I'm not connected to any sort of movement, abolition, for instance. What interests me is that we have what I think is like the strongest or most unbalanced relationship between the state and individual in our society. I can't think of a relationship that is more one-sided. And that's what keeps me, coming to work in the morning. It reconnected me to what I found really interesting as a young student. So that's my story.
That's a very, very nice story, and thank you for sharing it, Jeffrey. It's so just to clarify here, so just you were really going to quit the practice of law, I take it at some point, and that's when you discovered that you can get into this niche area and you started doing work in it and you fell in love with it and you reconnected with your passion for human rights. And then that's how you started this whole completely new chapter in your career.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
I was like, I can't do this for the next however many years, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
It's not interesting to me. It's not
That's so
rewarding to me.
nice, though. I mean, and I think that that's also very important for anyone who's watching this, and because I'm sure there are a lot of people who, after they've been practicing for some time, they either get bored or they just kind of lose the connection with the job that they're doing. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not good to be a lawyer or that you shouldn't continue doing legal work. Maybe you should just shift into a different area of practice, and then that will be, that's where you will find maybe your enthusiasm and your drive again. So that's a very interesting story. So thank you for sharing that with us. But now let's talk then about what you actually do in your new area of practice, which is personal injury, but in this context of individuals who are in uh, jails and prisons. So, how do we start this process, Jeffrey? How does a case like what you do start? I guess it's a civil
Mhm.
procedure, so there has to be a claim. Someone has to start it. It's probably an inmate. But tell us about the difficulties because they're in custody, and we know that there are limitations and difficulties that they may encounter if they want to sue. Like, do they sue while they're in custody, or do they have to wait when they're outside, or is it a family member? How does the process start?
So generally, when the phone rings,
Hmm.
I want to know, every lawyer has their own kind of mental intake
Yeah.
process. And for me, the first time I talk to someone uh, at a very high level, I want to know what happened and why is it CSC's fault, CSC being the Correctional Service of Canada, or if you're dealing with the provincial prison administrator, like the Ministry of, I can't remember what it's called in Ontario. I'm blanking.
Yeah.
but let's just use CSC for example. What happened? Why is it CSC's fault? And from there, you delve into those two issues um, with a view to establishing the liability aspect. Because in order to obtain compensation, let's say one prisoner assaults another. Well, there's no point suing the person who assaulted you because they probably don't have any money.
Right.
So you need to connect it to uh, a mistake that the prison made. And that can be very tricky. So it depends very much on what the specific situation is.
Can you give
And
us examples, for example, of how you would connect in this instance, where, because as you said, if it's between two inmates, they got into a fight, how is that the correctional facility's problem? Like, and compensation, I'm assuming, is being sought by the facility, not the inmate, as you mentioned, because they don't have the ability to pay, probably. So,
right, so you're looking for some sort of screw up, and usually it's a security error.
mhm.
So, for example, I have a case right now where in provincial remand, my client got into a fight with let's just call him the assailant, with the assailant. They have both have children with the same woman. They got into a fight. My client beat up the assailant. Fast forward however many years, 5 years or so. They're both in Millhaven. They both get to Millhaven. The assailant is on the range first. My client is told he's going to be put on this range.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah, do you have any incompatibles on this range? And it's such a strange question. Do you
Yeah.
have any incompatibles? Well, how would I know if I have
Yeah,
incompatibles unless you're going to tell me who's on the range?
right.
Anyway, the assailant's identified as an incompatible. So a correctional manager is brought in to do what's called a mediation to see if they can coexist. They shake hands and say there's no problem. Less than 24 hours later,
Yeah.
the assailant, who's the weekend he's the guy in the weekend who is able to orchestrate whose doors get opened. He asks the correctional staff to open my client's doors, and then he attacks him with three other people. Less than 24 hours of getting on range.
Mm,
So in that situation, what the argument from our perspective is well, look, they shared a child with the same woman, um, and my client beat the guy up. So there is motive for the assailant who can control access to my client to get him on range into a vulnerable position.
yeah.
And you, CSC, you should have known that. You should
Yeah.
have conducted a robust mediation rather than, like a 30-second interview. Is there going to be a problem here? No. Okay, good. Go on range. So
Okay.
so that I think is a good example of how uh, one guy, a prisoner, endangers the life of my client. There's no point suing the prisoner. It's CSC who put them in this situation. It's CSC who's responsible for it.
Right, because they don't get to choose what they want to do, or like it's the institution that's making decisions ultimately and
Right,
deciding. Okay.
right.
But then who calls you here? Is it the inmate themselves, or is it a family member? Um, who are you
Uh,
getting information from about the incidents?
It's typically family, or, I get phone calls from people inside. I get letters and faxes out of the blue.
Okay.
Um, yeah, family members on the outside contact me. And then, yeah, phone calls from inside.
And how serious can the injuries be in these types of situations?
All the way up to and including death.
Okay.
I sadly have a fair bit of experience with wrongful death cases in which I act for families of
Hmm.
people who have been killed inside. One I'm working on now is um, an elderly gentleman, 75, 76, something like that. was put into RTC, Regional Treatment Center at Millhaven, um, which is a psychiatric hospital, or has a psychiatric range on it at least. Anyway, he was put there because he was forgetting to take his medication and because his body was failing him. So, you can already see this guy's extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
He was there on sexual offense convictions, which is another layer of vulnerability. And he was housed alongside an individual who was found not criminally responsible of a murder and is also a dangerous offender. This guy's, 30 some odd years younger, maybe 40 years younger than the deceased in this case. So you have, oh, and the assailant in this case had committed a number of offenses against sex offenders inside.
Mm.
So you have my client's loved one who's an extreme risk to this individual. This individual kills him. And so, our argument in that case is what on earth were you thinking, CSC, putting my client beside this guy?
Right.
What on earth were you thinking? Like anyone can see that this is hugely problematic.
Of course it is. And in that case, Jeffrey, so it's the family that's bringing the claim.
Right.
Um, but what is the compensation going to be for in this case?
So
If the individual is deceased.
right. So my basic impression of suing anyone in the United States is that you sue anyone for any reason, you automatically become a millionaire.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay.
Canada's very different,
Yeah.
generally, and with wrongful death cases in Ontario, it's very different
Yeah.
specifically. So under the Family Law Act, Section 61 allows loved ones to sue the wrongdoer for loss of companionship, care, and guidance. So they're modest claims. They rarely, sometimes you get into the low six figures for close relationships, but they're not claims that are valued at what they should be when someone dies because Canada's made the decision of not wanting to create the moral hazard of people suing and becoming millionaires over death. But they're important cases and that they're worth doing. Uh, and it's really important to hold CSC accountable in situations like this because this never should have happened.
Yeah. Yes.
This guy should have served his sentence, come out reunited with his family.
And in this case, so it's a civil case, so they're asking for monetary compensation, but they can still also have a criminal investigation, I guess, right? Like is there any issue if they want to seek a financial compensation? Are they precluded also from bringing a criminal like claim?
Well, I don't know the criminal side of it very well. Um, I think the answer to the question is no. I think the um, much bigger issue is getting um, police to take seriously any sort of criminal negligence
Yeah.
by CSC. I don't think there's any appetite for that. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't think I can't think of an example where I've seen that. Um, so really what typically happens in this situation, what happened in this exact situation is that CSC will conduct an investigation,
Hmm.
and that investigation will say, who could have foreseen this? That's exactly what happened in this situation. They investigated, their own investigation concluded this was not a foreseeable risk.
And is this over now or is this still ongoing?
No, it's ongoing.
Okay, because
Yeah.
obviously you're contesting that. You disagree with their conclusion.
I fundamentally
Yeah.
disagree with
Yeah.
their
Right.
conclusion.
Okay. We can maybe talk about that later as the case progresses. But
Yes.
okay, so you get the call either from the inmate or from a family member that there has been some physical injury. They're seeking compensation. And so you mentioned that you want to know, first of all, what happened and how the prison is involved or is responsible for what happened. So then what happens if you just guide us through the process?
Sure.
And one of the things, maybe if you can also cover, Jeffrey, is what kind of evidence are you looking for?
So, so there's a bit of back and forth. Oftentimes, I'll make the trip to Kingston or wherever the individual may be. I was recently in at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick
Hmm.
a couple months ago. I was at Donnacona in Quebec City last month. So, if the case warrants it, I'll go and sit down
You
with
go
the
anywhere
person.
in Canada.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And it is very nice to get out from behind my desk.
Yeah.
And I think you learn a lot. You can learn an awful lot just by going to a prison and being quiet and just looking around and just listening. You will get insights into what is going on and how to do your job better. So to get back on track, I'll either set up a call or several calls, or I'll spend a couple hours with the person getting to the bottom of what their case is about. Take whatever documents they have. Often they will have documents such as external hospital records or a grievance that they filed, which has come back. Hopefully, the grievance has been upheld, but where the grievance hasn't been upheld, you look at whether the reasoning is sensible in that case. But you take whatever documents you have, and then you go back to your desk and you put together your statement of claim. It's a statement of claim, whether you're in the provincial court of the province or in the federal court of Canada. You serve it, and then the rules provide for 20 days for a defense, but usually it's 3 to 6 months for a defense. Um, and then you proceed to exchanging documents and doing examinations for discovery. Um, After that, you engage in negotiations, whether it's a mediation or just picking up the phone or sending emails, sometimes angry emails to
Yeah.
the Department of Justice lawyers. And then you have it set down for trial, and there's a pre-trial conference. Then you're off to the races.
And this is so you mentioned the federal court and or the court of the province, that would be the superior
Superior
court
Court, yes,
of justice. So those are the two court levels where if there is a trial, it will end up being there.
precisely.
Okay. Is there a limitation period for when when there are damages? Um,
Yes. So speaking in Ontario, Ontario only, it's the general rule is 2 years.
okay.
Um, but there's exceptions to that. The two big exceptions are the discoverability principle. So the clock doesn't start ticking until you discover an aspect that crystallizes your right to sue, or crystallizes the notion that you ought to sue. Um, the more common one that I see is for sexual assaults. I've dealt with a number of sexual assault cases. One of my very first cases as a lawyer, I don't even think I was no, I wasn't even a lawyer. I was articling. It was like 2012 or so. Um, Back in the 80s, I think it was, there was a prison warden in BC named McDougall, Roderick McDougall, and he was infamous for sexually assaulting prisoners. So in that case, he demanded to perform oral sex on my client in exchange for my client having a pass out into the community. Things like that were happening. Um, I have another case now where at Grand Valley in Ontario, back in 2016, a female client was sexually assaulted by correctional staff. So, it's well past 2016 now, but in Ontario, as in BC, there is no limitation for claims based in sexual assaults.
Okay, no limitations for,
Right.
okay. That's good, good to know. We were also, before we started recording, Jeffrey, you mentioned that there could also be charter violations. Maybe if we can get into that and just clarify what kind of charter violations are we talking about in these types of situations?
Sure. So typically the most concrete violations will be Section 7 and Section 15, 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I often, well, perhaps not often now, when I was younger and more hopeful and enthusiastic, I would include Section 12 claims, but uh, typically pretty tough hill to climb there.
Yeah.
But Section 7 is the one that I deal with the most. And I think a good example is the current litigation arising from the November 2025 break-in at Grand Valley Institution. Grand Valley Institution is a women's prison in Ontario, in Kitchener. And in November, a gentleman hopped the fence separating the minimum uh, campus from the medium security compound. He just hopped right over the fence. From there, he started chasing a number of women around. He attempted to break into one of the houses and he assaulted at least two people. So uh, we are representing, roughly speaking, 50 women. Um, and the claim there is, the claim deals with a lot of things, but in the context of Section 7, the claim really deals with security of the person.
Mm-hmm.
We have spent a lot of time interviewing our clients in that case, and as will probably come to as a surprise to exactly no one, is that the vast majority of these women have extraordinarily traumatic backgrounds. Um, Most, if not all, have just a horrific history of sexual assault and other abuse by men. So when you have people who have been sentenced to imprisonment, they're sent somewhere where they're expecting to be safe from men. A number of people have told me they're glad to be in prison because they got to escape from whoever was abusing them. So you have these women who are expecting to be safe. Someone jumps over the fence and starts, acting crazy, and it scares the hell out of these women. So that is an example of a security of the person claim. They do not feel psychologically safe when they were witnessing that, but also every single day after that because they don't know who's hopping over the fence next. And they don't have trust that CSC is taking their safety seriously, uh, just based on their general experience with CSC, but also in
Yeah.
respect of CSC's response to the situation.
In that context, though, Jeffrey, does it matter if the person is on remand and waiting for a trial and is still presumed innocent, versus a situation where it's a person who's serving a sentence and who lost the presumption of innocence, or it doesn't really matter?
No, it doesn't. Not in
Okay.
that situation. Um, and that situation specifically deals with the federal prison. So everyone there has been sentenced.
Hmm.
Their presumption of innocence has been addressed.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, going back to first principles, I think the answer remains the same. No, no, it doesn't matter. Uh, Having the right to security of the person, being free from, a crazed man running around a prison, that I don't think that matters whether you are on remand or whether you're serving a sentence.
Okay. And when you're helping then your client seek compensation, so explain to us, what is it like that you're asking for?
Sure. So the main sources of damage are pain and suffering.
Okay.
So pain and suffering encompasses
Physical or psychological or both?
both.
Okay.
Yeah. So um, taking the Grand Valley situation, for example. some of the women were assaulted and had physical injuries. Most of them were not. They are just traumatized by the fact that some strange man broke in. So those claims are for psychological damages. So what we were doing in those cases, we're in the process of engaging several psychologists, and there's some really wonderful people who had experience working with CSC, and then they went out on their own as psychologists. There's really lovely people doing this work. So we're in the process of engaging psychologists like that to, sit down with these women and understand where they were at before, because as I said, most of the people are dealing with a lot of trauma before this happened
Mhm.
and sussing out how, as a result of this, their trauma has been exacerbated
Increased.
or they're
Yeah.
experiencing new forms of trauma,
But how's that assessed though?
psychologically or monetarily.
Well, both.
Yeah,
Uh,
both. Psychologically, I don't know.
Yeah.
I have to read their reports. Uh, so they're going to say, a baseline they were, I don't know. Let's use
So
a
is it in
name
terms
here.
of symptoms, let's say, like in
Exactly.
the
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
manifestations of the symptoms, or if there are new symptoms that they started to,
Oh,
uh,
exactly. Yeah. So, uh, you know, uh, it's foreseeable that one or several of these women are going to have a diagnosis or ought to have had a diagnosis of PTSD going into prison.
yeah.
Well, now the psychologist is going to probably look at, okay, you had PTSD before. What were the symptoms like before? What are the symptoms like now?
So maybe now they can't sleep at all,
That's been a
or
big problem. That's been a
yeah,
huge problem.
like the
People
lack of
are telling me they
anxiety.
anxiety, they're looking over their shoulders, they're looking out the window, they're staying in their rooms more.
Yeah.
These are on the medium, they're actual houses, they're like little cottages.
Yeah.
So the front door doesn't lock, but their bedroom doors lock. So a number of them have said, I'm staying in my room with the door locked more. I didn't do that before. I used to like at night going outside and walking laps. I don't really do that anymore. Or when I do that, I'm always, checking over my
Yeah.
shoulder to see if I'm safe.
S- So, but how does that translate into money?
So we look at past cases, and very, very often we're dealing with motor vehicle injury cases because
That's where there's a lot of physical damage and injuries.
well, that's just where the case law
Yeah.
exists. The case law in this area is pretty small, well, comparatively very small compared to personal injury. So, for example, I have a couple textbooks called Personal Injury Quantum Index or something like that. And it's a chart. It says what happened, what the injuries were, what amount of money was attributed
Yeah.
to the injuries.
Okay, so
So,
that's like the reference kind of
exactly. Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Jeffrey, because in the criminal context, if I want to bring it back to criminal, we know that the conditions in the jails right now throughout Ontario are very bad, and we've seen a few quite shocking incidents, specifically in Maplehurst, where probably some inmates will suffer some um, damages and some psychological traumatic, post-traumatic symptoms as a result of that. So, have you dealt with these particular situations, like for example, due to the lockdowns or to the specific jail conditions, where the personal injury is not because of a fight or like a physical assault, or maybe it is like in these cases, but it is particularly because of the jail conditions and the lockdowns. Do you have those types of cases as well?
Um, so there's a class action for the
Hmm.
Maplehurst
Right,
ISIT, and then
that's
there's a number of
correct.
individual claims, and we represent eight or so individuals
Hmm.
who have brought individual claims for the ISIT as well as the lockdown conditions. Um, I don't know if I've ever sued for lockdown conditions themselves.
Okay.
Um,
Why not? Is this not a possibility though? Because it's becoming really concerning. Um, there are lockdowns, it seems like every day, everywhere, and they're having a lot of impact on inmates, negative consequences. Is there not a possibility here for an inmate to sue the jail for the damages that they suffered due to the lockdowns?
yes, the difficulty is that there are class actions in this area. There has been at least one class action, and when I started doing this, um, I stayed away from that issue because you're not, it's very difficult to bring an individual case when there's also a class action
Yeah.
proceeding. And then I never really returned to the question of whether an individual can or should bring such a case. And frankly, I don't know the answer. It wouldn't be difficult to figure out the answer.
Hmm.
And I encourage, if it's, if it's possible to do it, then I would be very, very happy if someone else took up the mantle and did that. More people need to be doing this work
Yes.
because um, I think governments are really good at saying the right things, but we all know as lawyers what's going on
Yeah.
in these places, and the only way to make a change is to make it too expensive to carry on business as usual.
Yeah. And how successful are these claims in the area where you practice? Is there hope? I mean, I'm sure that you're getting compensation, but is it like how much money are they? Can they become millionaires out of that, or what is what are we looking at here?
Well, I want to be a little bit guarded, but I will answer your question. I think in personal injury, some of the big money comes from wage loss.
Hmm.
Um, let's say you're earning $150,000 a year and you can't work anymore and you have 20 years left in your career. It's a fair bit of money right there. That's not the situation we're dealing with here,
Right.
typically. So we're typically suing for, as I said, pain and suffering, modest charter damages, and any special damages that exist, as well as any sort of aggravated or punitive damages. The cases are worth doing. I've managed to, earn a livelihood. Uh, some people earn more money than I do. Some people do not earn more money than I do, but I've managed to make it work. I would encourage anyone else to, try to have a go at it as well, because you can make a living doing it. In terms of the clients, what I have found with the clients is that I think most people, whether this is true of prisoners or people who've been through the legal process in general, or by the time they get to me, they're just super grateful that anyone is taking the time of day to listen to them,
Yeah.
hear what they have to say,
Yeah.
and believe in them.
Yeah.
Um, So, you try to do right by the client financially. One of the ways I do that is I don't discuss money up front. Clients, I want to know two things when a client first calls me. The client wants to know one thing, which is how much money am I
That's
getting?
going to cost
And,
me.
and
Yeah.
I say to them, I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to tell you, oh, I'm going to get you $100,000 and then
Yeah.
I get you 50 or 20
Yeah.
and you're like, Jeff, where the hell's my other 70 grand
Yeah.
or whatever. So, and people understand that. Um, People are typically very grateful that you are just believing in them and listening to them and trying to help. As I said, the cases are worth doing. Um, if you're money motivated and there's nothing wrong with that, then I would not encourage this area because you can make more money
Doing
probably
tax
doing less
law.
work doing
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah.
Uh, so
But
that's my non-answer to your question.
right, but let me ask you this. When you, as a lawyer in these types of cases, you want to ask for a compensation, an amount. So I understand you mentioned that there are some kind of charts that you look at in the case law, but I'm guessing here that they're kind of guidelines, right? Or are
Yeah.
they carved in stone? Like, is it like if it's this type of injury, this is how much you will get? Or is it also, is there any kind of judicial discretion here as well?
Well, so there's a couple things going on here. One is what those cases say that you just mentioned, the guidelines. The other is um, we're typically working with the same lawyers at the Department of Justice, so
Yeah.
you get to know each other, and you don't see the same scenario twice, but you see similar scenarios, and you
Hmm.
can say to the lawyer, look, John Doe's case that we did together 2 years ago is worth 50 grand. This one is more or less the same, so this one should be worth 52 grand. So it's not that you develop your own case law as between the lawyers, but I mean, you kind of do. There's not a lot of jurisprudence on this area specifically.
Yeah.
And I think that there is, that's a point of sensitivity for the government because I don't think they want a lot of case law.
Yeah.
Particularly, my impression is that courts are starting to take this stuff a lot more seriously, particularly after when was it, 2018, 2019, when the solitary confinement case came out of BC. I
Hmm.
think that was kind of like a wake-up call to
Yeah.
the court in general. Um, and so I think there's a lot of pressure to settle cases. And that's typically how it goes in civil anyway.
Yeah.
So how do we settle cases? How do we know the amount? Well, you kind of do the job for long enough and you just kind of know.
But the judge can ultimately also impose a different amount, or how does it work?
Right.
If it
So
goes to court, because I know you're mentioning here the cases where it settles, so there's no need, I guess, to litigate the issue. But if there's no
if it does, yeah.
agreement and it goes to litigation.
So it's the exact same as in open sentencing. So
Okay.
the Crown says, these four cases establish a range of
Hmm.
4 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And the defense says, well, these four cases establish a range of
Right.
1 to 3 years. It's the same. So
Yeah.
we would say, look, this case said 100, that one said 200, that one said 300. Department of Justice is going to say, well, that one said 20 to 40. And the judge finds something in the middle, works something out.
Yeah. Yeah. Or completely disagrees with one party and
Yeah.
agrees with one. Okay, and I wanted to ask you, Jeffrey, for these types of claims, do the inmates have to wait until they're out of custody, if there is hope for them to get out of custody, or is this something that they can start while they're still incarcerated?
Either there's no off the top of my head, I cannot think of any legal reason why one would wait until they're out. There's many practical reasons, such as, you can email me,
Yeah,
you can call me
right.
whenever you
Well,
want. You
that's the
can,
issue, right? Because when they're in custody, it must be very difficult for them to um, like because it's not a criminal case.
Mhm,
It's a
mhm.
civil, and they're actually suing the place where they're staying.
Right.
So, I
I
mean, it
just had
must be like I don't think the guards are gonna help them do that.
I, I just had a ridiculous situation where the client had a high profile criminal case. He has been targeted because of who he is.
Hmm.
And so what we did is we sent a USB with um, the government's disclosure. to him so that he could look at it on the computer. Well, the institution said, no, you can't look at this on the computer because this isn't a criminal case. Um, so, my argument was really twofold. It's, well, I am suing you, and you're
Yeah.
telling me I can't look at your documents on your computer. That was what they were saying. So the second argument was, okay, well, we're suing you because you're not taking his security safely, and now you want me to send in the 500 pages of pieces of paper that you've disclosed. How is that going to help his security?
Yeah.
If one of those pages goes missing, that very well could be a problem.
Yeah.
So I couldn't really get an answer from these people for 2 months, and I, with the client, decided to say, "Well, you're responsible for his safety. We have flagged this for you. You want us to send in 500 pieces of paper? We're going to do that," and that's what we did.
Wow. But I mean, it must be a challenge, though, for those who are in custody and who already want to start to sue. I mean, doesn't that open also a whole bunch of new problems for them that they might be treated even worse by the jail staff,
Right.
if
So
they know about that?
I started my answer by saying I can't think of a legal reason to wait, but there are practical reasons. One of
Yeah.
the practical reasons is, you know, conducting your affairs, whether it's banking, whether it's, I don't know, doing your taxes, whether it's dealing with an accountant, whether it's dealing with a lawyer, 100% easier outside.
Yeah.
A very significant issue is the one that you're raising now, which is whether your safety is going to be compromised by
Hmm.
doing this. It's difficult to prove that any particular person is targeted by prison staff for suing. But I have heard it enough times in my career, whether it's guards making snide comments, whether it's guards outing people as a rat or a sex
Yeah.
offender, whether rightly or wrongly, or sorry, correctly or incorrectly, uh, whether it's subjecting them to extra, attention. I've heard all this enough times to believe that this is something that actually happens. Now, I don't want to come across as painting with too wide of a brush here. This doesn't happen to everyone, and not every CSC staff person does this. We're probably dealing with, like in any workplace, a couple of bad apples, but that is a serious consideration.
Yeah.
Another consideration is if you get money for someone and it gets around that that person has money, are they going to
Yeah.
be a risk
Yeah.
or subject
Yeah.
to risk because they have something that other people want?
Yeah. And
So,
because I mean, people, when they're in custody, all they do is talk about
ex-
what's going on in their
exactly,
lives.
exactly,
So,
exactly.
wow. I mean, Jeffrey, this was really fascinating. I have to say, I've learned so much from this interview because this is a completely different area of practice, and I didn't know about this. And I will definitely let my clients know about you. I know you have a lot of work, but it's really very important. And so I really encourage a lot of people to watch this, especially criminal lawyers, because I didn't know that there was this very niche area, and it's really fascinating. It's very interesting. So I want to thank you for taking the time today to chat with me about what you do. It's super important work, and I'm glad that you found this niche and that you remained in the practice of law because this is really important. And I think, as you mentioned, there aren't a lot of people who practice in this area. So if anyone is watching here and feels interested, I strongly encourage you to get in touch with Jeffrey. And Jeffrey, how can people find you if they want to know more about what you do?
So you can find me through our website, which is lzzdefense.ca.
Mhm.
And my email address is jhartman@lzz defense.ca. And I would love to talk to really anyone because I have a great joke that mainly I think is funnier than anyone else thinks is funny. And that joke is I prefer to talk about my work than actually do it. So I do welcome anyone who wants to talk. I'm happy to talk.
Well, it was very nice to hear you today talk about your work. It's super fascinating and interesting. And I really encourage everyone who's watching this to get in touch with Jeffrey to learn more about this area of practice and even get into it and help him do this work because we need this type of work. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for your time today.
Thank you. A big thank you to you.
Thank you.